Thank you so much for joining the second installment of the Alan v. Farrow discussion series. Each week for the next 2 weeks, we'll have a discussion on a different topic from each episode of the Emmy-nominated series. Today, for episode 2, we have a discussion on the protective parent's dilemma. I'm your moderator, Kathleen Russell. I'm the founding executive director of the Center for Judicial Excellence, a national child safety nonprofit based in San Rafael, California. For the past 15 years, we've worked to shine a light on the broken family law system in America that has devastated countless abused children and their protective parents, and we work to create judicial accountability. This panel discussion is the result of a partnership by Jane Doe Films, the Center for Judicial Excellence, the National Family Violence Law Center, and RAINN. Thank you also to the many organizations who are part of the host committee. You can read more about the partners and those organizations at allenbfarrowseries.com/takeaction. Please note, this panel may include descriptions of abuse that may be disturbing to viewers. Please take care of yourself while listening. Now to introduce our panelists for today. Kathy Sherlock is a mother turned activist after her daughter Kayden was brutally murdered by her biological father during court-ordered custody time. The family court awarded her father unsupervised visits despite a documented history of violent behavior and assault charges, as well as Catherine's attempts to file a restraining order and provide witnesses to corroborate. Catherine is now a dedicated advocate for custody reform on the federal and state levels, with Kayden's Law, which passed in the Pennsylvania Senate, which would require custody judges to prioritize children's safety and recommends courts across the state implement child and domestic abuse training for judges and court personnel, amongst other reforms. Darrel Riley is a father of 2 daughters who were forced by a King County, Washington judge into family reunification camp, which he describes as unregulated, unlicensed threat therapy isolation. Darrel has spent years researching court-ordered reunification programs and has contributed to numerous news stories about them. Priscilla Gilman is an essential voice in Alan v. Farrow as a longtime family friend of the Farrow family, who witnessed some of Woody Allen's troubling behaviors toward Dylan as a child. Priscilla is also a former professor of English literature at Yale and Vassar College, and the author of the memoir, The Anti-Romantic Child, and the forthcoming The Critic's Daughter. Adrian Ionescu is a protective parent whose children were sent to family reunification camp. Adrian was not allowed to have contact with his children for 3 years. Custody of his children was eventually reinstated upon appealing the lower court's decision. Welcome to all of our panelists. In tonight's episode, we learn a lot more about Mia's relationship with Woody, and it wasn't all roses. Mia's friends and family reported that gradually over time, Woody began to chip away at Mia's self-esteem and that she was completely beholden to him in her career, living in his controlled world, and feared living up to his standards. They also reported that he tried to isolate her and keep her from her friends. These are all common abuser tactics that serve to keep a protective parent off balance. Priscilla, I want to start with you. What was it like to see this happen to Mia, someone you'd come to know over many years? And did you realize then that it was a warning sign of things to come in the family?
I absolutely did not realize that it was a sign of things to come in the family. We didn't have the phrase coercive control at that point in time. And although I did, and I testified in the second episode of the docuseries, I did see Mia's intimidation by Woody professionally. I did hear her nervousness and anxiety on nights before she was going to film with him, worrying about living up to his standards, not feeling that she was talented or gifted enough to give him what he would demand. And I remember thinking it was so strange because she had a great career before Woody. She was a brilliant actress. She gave phenomenal performances in his films, and he never gave her praise or affirmation for the performances that she gave. And I do remember vividly her anxiety, both leading up to filming with him and after a day's filming. She would come home and talk about how he didn't smile or he didn't tell her that she was good. And I can also say, Kathy, that Carly Simon's testimony in the second episode really rent my heart. I did not see Mia spending a lot of time with friends. And I went out to dinner a lot with Woody and Mia and my boyfriend at the time, Mia's son. But I do remember Mia talking about friends and wanting to see them. And I remember thinking it's odd, but I guess her whole life is her family and her career.
Right. One of the common tactics that abusers use against protective parents is also to accuse them of orchestrating a campaign of lies against them in court, organizing their friends and family to join this campaign. Can you talk, Priscilla, about what it was like to be in Mia's inner circle as the trial was unfolding? I think this is a common experience for protective parents.
Yeah, one of the things that Woody, one of the central tenets of his campaign of lies was that Mia had compelled us to speak on her behalf, that she manipulated us, used us to tell lies, when in fact, Mia didn't ask any of us to speak. I spoke out to journalists at the time because I felt that we needed a countervailing voice to Woody's. And I felt a moral obligation to speak out as a witness to what I had seen and what I had experienced. And Mia never asked any of us to do any of this. When the children were on the news, it was because they came forward and they wanted to speak on behalf of their mother, because we felt that Woody had all the power, all the money, all the influence, all the media outlets. And I think that's that was one of the most disturbing aspects of it. I get trolls coming after me on the internet saying, Mia's manipulating you, she's asking you to do this. I do this because it is an ethical duty to speak out. And all of the parents on this panel and all of the parents out there who are struggling in situations like this need and deserve witnesses and advocates in their circle to speak out and tell the truth about what they experienced.
Right. Thank you so much. Kathy, I want to turn to you for a minute. And I'd love to talk about these tactics and how the man who murdered your daughter tried to hide his abusive ways from the judge in your case. This is a big part of what protective parents have as a dilemma, which is the topic for tonight. Convincing judges and others in court that the parent who's play acting in court is not the same person who's harming his family behind closed doors.
Right. Well, we see this a lot, and I obviously experienced it. They always were on their best behavior. They would poke and poke and poke and poke you until eventually you'd snap. And then when you snap, you're the one that was, being viewed as crazy. And you're the one that, we were doing this to take the child away from the parent. And it was never that way. It was always viewed as, we were doing this or I was doing this, to get back at him. And there was no reason for me to get back at him. I had no reason at all to get back at him for anything. I was there solely for the safety of my daughter. I wasn't trying to take him from her or her from him. I wasn't trying to do any of that. And you see this across all the courts in the entire country, that every time it seems to be, not always, but a woman goes to court and discusses some type of behavior, or whether it's abuse or just not normal mentality or anything, they flip it around on you as trying to do it to get back, or because you're bitter, or because you have nothing better to do, and you're just some scorned woman that I guess has nothing better to do with their time and money, and want to take these people to court, when in reality what the real situation was, I was really just trying to say there's something wrong here, and nobody would listen to me. There were a couple of times in court where he had no lawyer and he was pro se, and he was on the stand questioning me for hours, and nobody stopped it. The judge didn't stop it. My lawyer didn't stop it. Nobody stopped it. And eventually, you know, how long can you sit there till someone, I mean, I guess I didn't have the right self-control in court, but eventually I would, you know, not freak out, but I would get upset, and they would be like, oh my God, look at you, you have problems and you need a mental health evaluation. And sure enough, that one time in court, I was ordered a separate mental health evaluation that cost me $3,000. And all it came back and said is I had anxiety due to said situation. And, you know, they listed all of their problems, but I was still to this day viewed as, the courts noted that the parents both had problems. Well, I had anxiety versus narcissistic, suicidal, depressed, antisocial behavior. I had none of those personality traits that were, you know, that I paid a lot of money by a professional that they appointed, and they still came out in my reports. Yet still to this day, I'm viewed as, you know, emotional, and I did this to get back at him, and it just goes on and on and on. And it's, you know, I don't like to say that it's sexist, but sometimes it comes down to women are viewed as these emotional beings that, you know, we're out just for one thing, and, you know, can't possibly be anything else. It's amazing to me. So, I mean,
Yeah, it is a real conundrum when you're in the court and viewed that way. So we also heard tonight about the utter disbelief that Mia experienced when she was faced with Dylan's abuse by a man she loved and trusted. And I just want to clarify that Adrian and Darrel's children did not endure sexual abuse, but they did experience trauma. Adrian, is there a moment where you realized your kids were experiencing trauma and you realized you had to fight for their safety? Can you talk about that?
Oh yeah, definitely. A lot happened during the divorce. It was a very difficult time for my children, for myself, for everybody around. And yeah, they were afraid of their mom. Clearly they were traumatized. And there is a point to which you realize that they need you more than ever. And the problem is with family court system is that actually being a good parent apparently turns against you. So seems like doing the right thing is the wrong thing in family court, and basically abusive parents, and we can look at Kathy's situation, seem to have the ear of the judge for whatever reason. So I'm not so sure. I was not allowed to see them basically for 3 years even. And what I decided to do, and I know they needed my help, I went through all the possible motions and appeals until finally the custody was reversed in the New Jersey's appellate division, and which was a pretty unprecedented decision at the time. And one piece of advice I would like to give to all these parents like us, like all of us here in this panel, is to not get overwhelmed by the legal process, because the legal process is in a sense stacked against you. It's about fees, it's about everything. And Kathy actually presented a few of those issues that she had with her situation. And that's a tragic situation. It's unbelievably tragic. So they need to keep fighting actually for their children. They should never abandon their children, because the whole system is stacked against you. And you have to continue to fight. You cannot give up.
Thank you. There's a scene in tonight's episode that I know resonates deeply for our protective parents. Mia described showing the explicit photos that Woody took to his therapist. He responds that it wasn't a therapist's job to moralize while gawking at the photos. Kathy, I was gonna see if you could talk about the people who work in and around the court system. Do you believe they're trauma informed? And as a nurse, how maddening was it to deal with people who so carelessly endangered your daughter?
No, I don't think very many people these days are trauma informed. I feel like the police, for certain, I mean, I don't know what training they have, but they're all still stuck in a old school type mentation. They didn't understand domestic violence. They didn't understand mental illness. They didn't understand trauma. They didn't understand any of that. Not really anyone I kind of came in touch with or came across understood that. Even as therapists and the CCES evaluators that were on my case, they were appointed by the courts, but I think they're just right. I don't know their entire background, but I don't believe they have any trauma training, any domestic violence training, anything. there's really nothing kind of setting the standard for this. And especially when you need help in a case that involves mental illness and domestic violence and all the above, I don't feel that they were adequately trained. I don't feel like anyone's even regulating that at this level or any level that I've dealt with. And that's a huge problem, because you look back at all the things that we look at now and we know now, and it's, well, that's because of this and that. And we know, and we have the studies out there. It's just they haven't really caught up on the new information that we have out there, and they're still set in their ways. So it's very frustrating. And it's very hard when you're trying to say, you know, not doing this because I'm trying to gain anything. I'm really here because this is the only way that I can actually get help. And there's really nothing else you can do in this country to help yourself in a situation with domestic violence or mental illness, except for go through the courts and look how they treat everybody. It's for money. It's all for money, and they don't seem to really care. And there's really nothing we can do about it. And I guess that's why we all do what we do, trying to say there's something wrong here and it needs to change. Let's look at what went wrong. Let's look at all the things that are going wrong. But it's a very long and frustrating process that, we have gotten a little far, but we should be a lot further at this point with all that we know. And it's a very slow uphill battle, trying to get people to understand that, there's a real serious problem.
Right. Thank you. Darrel, did you expect more from the people that were working in your divorce case, and why?
I really did expect more. And I worked for the government. I worked for the police department. I worked for the courts. I really expected that they were going to step up and protect my children in those situations. CPS, when they first got involved in the case, they really fought hard for my children. I could not have asked for anything more until my youngest daughter tried to file for help with the courts, and then the courts shut them down. And I have to give kudos to my attorneys. They fought all the way through with whatever they could fight with. But the rulings that came down in my case are so strange that every time I would look at them and they would be astonished. And so we fought all the way to the end. We never abandoned my daughter or daughters. But at the end of the day, the court rulings were just so bizarre that we couldn't figure out how to fight anymore. And so, I just didn't understand how strange that process could be when you go in, argue with logic, use facts, have everything prepared, and they don't want to accept any of the information that they've been provided.
Right. Yeah, we hear lots of stories of people in the system who work to protect children, and then they get reassigned off of the case as soon as that happens. So I'm sorry that happened to you. Priscilla, I wanted to ask what it was like to hear about this unethical behavior by professionals who are supposed to be there to heal families. Were you shocked by what you heard at the time?
I was absolutely shocked when I heard both the example that you gave before about the therapist saying it's not a therapist's position to moralize, but also the moment when Mia noticed behavior that disturbed her, behavior that I also noticed, the thumb sucking, the getting in bed in the underwear, goes to the therapist, and the therapist says, this is not sexual behavior, although it could be interpreted as such. Now, I didn't know that at the time. So this was news to me. I didn't know that Mia had reported that behavior. I never discussed the behavior with Mia at the time. She was protecting all of the children from her concerns and anxieties. She was going to professionals and getting help from them. And the fact that the therapists assuaged her anxiety, right? Essentially said, we're the expert and we're telling you that you're imagining that there's a sexual component to this. It gave me chills seeing that, and just thinking about how when people criticize protective parents and they say, oh, well, why didn't they do enough? They saw the behavior. Why didn't they stop it? Why didn't they get out sooner? Mia went to the people that we are supposed to trust, that we are supposed to be able to rely on to tell us and help us and protect us. And the experts repeatedly told her, no, it's not immoral. It's not sexual, whatever it is, to make her feel I'm overreacting, I've done my due diligence, and there's nothing more I can do. So it was absolutely horrifying to me, Kathy.
Mm-hmm. And Dylan was extremely lucky that her family court judge protected her by not forcing her into ongoing visits with her father. This so rarely happens in family law, with an estimated 58,000 American children who are court ordered each year into ongoing contact or custody with an abusive parent. We get calls weekly from parents in crisis because of these harmful decisions. Kathy, your daughter paid the ultimate price with her life because the court insisted on forcing Kayden to visit with a father that she feared and talked about fearing. Can you talk about the impossible role that the court forces you into as a protective parent, where you are forced to knowingly send your child into danger in order to avoid losing custody altogether?
There's a lot, I get a lot of pushback or trolls, so to speak, that say, well, why'd you let her go with him? Why'd you drop her off? Why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? Well, I would never let my kid do this, and I would never let that. I had spent however many years in court trying to get a final court order. There was a point where 21 days prior to Kayden being killed, I had reached out to my lawyer saying, the email says word for word, I am legit afraid for this child's well-being. If you are unwilling to help me, please point me in the direction of someone that is. And all I got back from her is, I can't help you if you're unwilling to listen to me. And all she kept saying is she couldn't file for custody modification if I was in contempt. Well, I was in contempt because he said I was in contempt, because I was in contempt every day according to him. And I remember at that point we had the final order, but I just knew that things were going wrong and things were going downhill, and there was no one to help me, nothing. I remember being at work. I got that email back from my lawyer. First time I ran in the back, I was crying hysterically. I was on the phone with my husband saying, we need to do something. We're going to have a dead child on our hands. Please help, call whoever you need to call, get us a new lawyer, call whoever. So he reached out to however many lawyers in the area, and they all said the same thing. There was nothing I could do except for file for modification. That would have taken 3 months. Well, she was killed 21 days later. And I kept saying, there's something really wrong here. And no one would help me. The police what were they going to do? Take another report? In the morning that my husband dropped her off, I was at work, and I remember being like, don't send her. Something inside me said, just tell him not to bring her. And it was 9:05. He had to be there at 10. And I texted him. I said, did you leave yet? And if he hadn't left, I would have been just stay home. We'll deal with it. Whatever the consequences are. If I go to jail, I don't care. It didn't matter. And he said he had already left. So I said, okay, it's one day. She'll be home tomorrow. And we're on vacation after that. It'll be quiet or whatever. And well, she never made it home the next day. So I have a lot of regret on that. You're in a hard spot. What are you gonna? I would have gone to jail for my child. I would have done anything for my child. I would have given my life for my child, but I had absolutely no options really. You face losing custody. You face going to jail yourself. I know many of women have been thrown in jail. Many of men that have been thrown in jail on these custody orders, which are civil orders. They don't bring criminal stuff into it any other way, except for when you are in contempt of court, then they have no problem throwing you in jail for 3 months or however long. And I look back now and I should have gone to jail. I should have broke the court order. I should have done so many different things. I was given no options. And I live with that guilt, and I'll live with that guilt forever. And people have no problem reminding me of it, but I don't know what else I could have done.
You're in an impossible situation there. And I know our hearts go out to you for the trauma that you will now, I know you're working on and dealing with and will forever, because you lost your precious daughter. And I know it's heartbreaking. Priscilla, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Kathy, I'm just moved to my core by everything that you've said. And as you were talking about your experience, it so resonates for me. We had a good outcome that Dylan was not forced to see Woody, but Mia gets the same kind of attacks after finding the photos of Suni. Why did you allow Woody to come to the house? She wouldn't have been assaulted in the attic if you hadn't been out shopping on the day when he came. Why did you allow it? Well, she had to allow it. He was allowed visitation. She tried everything she could, but I so hear you. And she has struggled with a lot of guilt. She has people coming after her all the time. When the documentary aired, why weren't you home that day? There were 3 grown-ups there. There were 3 babysitters. Would he manage to evade them? And I think you did the absolute best that you could possibly have done. And I understand the guilt. I do. But I don't think you need to have any of that guilt, because I think you were in a situation with no options, and you did the best that you could.
Thank you. And I'm not alone. I mean, Kayden's not a case. This happens almost every day. There's a news story, and it's, you look back and Kathleen tracks it. Like, you know, these courts were warned. They knew Kayden's case was a yellow case, and if you don't want to talk about the ones that are killed, then let's talk about the ones that do survive, like Darrel's children and me and everyone else that, you know, that are traumatized after being put in these court situations.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. I do want to shift back to, we were talking about parental alienation, which is going to be the subject of next week's panel. But it is commonly used against mothers who are bringing evidence of abuse to court. But Darrel and Adrian were both forced to defend themselves against parental alienation. And so it does happen to fathers as well, and a lot of the very similar or identical ways. Adrian, this is a big industry in the courts, this parental alienation. I call them snake oil salesmen, but you know, this pushing of this theory. Can you talk about just the significant amount of money that is being made, and that, you know, parents are essentially on the hook to have to pay these tens, hundreds, thousands of dollars, some people over $1 million to protect their children?
Definitely, I can talk about it. So, well, this business, I have an estimate that was done about 9 years ago in 2012. At that time, it was a $28 billion business, billion, not million. I'm sure probably now it's 50 or more, who knows. I spent myself probably a couple of $100,000 putting myself in debt to defend my children and try to protect them. Eventually, I had actually to hire a lawyer to protect myself because the court started threatening me when I didn't give up the whole fight. The problem is that the court systems encourage this type of business. I don't think the court system should be a business. I mean, it looks like almost like the judges are CEOs of some running business there, and they decide who the experts are, who the lawyers are, who protects the children, who the guardian is for the children. And things are not working very well, as we can see. Look at Kathy's case. In my case, got even worse. So after I reversed the alienation, they made changes to the panel. And then of course, I started another set of appeals and I'm still responsible for all the fees of the reverse trial, if that's possible. I mean, they managed to pull that one. I don't know how, but obviously it all looks like a little bit of a fraternity between judges and lawyers, because there is no other explanation. Furthermore, the protective parent has to be punished, right? Mia had to be punished. Kathy had to be punished. We all threatened, right? Darrel knows how being punished is. And we all had to defend ourselves as if we did something wrong. Most of us are the ones without the money. It turns out that only the parents with money can fight this kind of thing. I have an interesting observation. I mean, if alienation and parental alienation is such a noble cause, right? How come these high-fee lawyers, these experts, never involve themselves in pro bono cases? I've never heard of that. And that'll be interesting. If it's such a great thing and you try to protect the children, why don't you go into the pro bono cases and, you know, try to defend the children that are less fortunate, that have less money? I've never heard of a case like that in which they've been involved in that. And if somebody can point out a case to me, I would love to hear it and see it. And as I said, I don't think family court should be a business. It should be just a court and make sure it protects the children.
Right, that is what most state statutes say. It's to protect the best interests of the children. And
well,
in many cases, it's drifted away from that. But I would really like to turn now for a few minutes to talk about these court-ordered reunification camps that I care deeply about and have worked for years to combat, since many of them are based in Northern California, where the Center for Judicial Excellence is. If you don't know about reunification, be sure to check out the hour-long NPR Reveal podcast, which took more than 4 years to produce, at the allenvfarrowseries.com/take-action page that we put together for this panel. But Darrel and Adrian, both of you lost your children for years to a family reunification camp, which was court ordered, while many mothers and fathers right now are battling to keep their kids out of these threat therapy programs. Adrian, can we start with you? How does the family court justify sending kids to a forced reunification camp? What needs to be in the case for that to happen?
Well, usually family courts take this approach. It boils down that they have to repair the relationship with the, as we call them, estranged parent. Now, estranged parent doesn't necessarily mean abusive parent. It may just be a bad parent, right? Doing the wrong things all the time. And I'm not trying to even, discuss about Mia's case, about Kathy's case. It's sometimes parents are just not good parents. There's nothing you can do about it. And children are obviously going to be attracted by the better parent or the good parent that tries to help them, tries to do everything for them. Now, in my case, I can tell you that the judge and the court didn't listen to the children's therapist, didn't listen to the guardian ad litem. They only listened to basically the so-called alienation expert. So that was almost the only voice that was heard in the court and in the final decision of the court. So seems like being a good, loving parent, it's a stigma, it's a bad thing. So let's not be good parents, let's be abusive parents, and we probably get more rights. Seems like that's what the courts are trying to tell us, which I think it's a huge mistake. Now, the other problem we have, and I don't think it was mentioned too much, they also stifle the children's voice. Because what they do is, oh, you're parroting basically, remember we discussed about that earlier, you're parroting the other parent. So we don't listen to the, protective parent. We don't listen to the children, because obviously they're now parroting, right? Supposedly the protective parent. And ultimately what happens, they only listen to the alienation experts. The protective parent loses the custody. They don't see their children for years. They lose them forever, like in Kathy's case. And I do believe that the court pretty much do this thing deliberately, and there is no accountability to, for these errors of judgment. I mean, we talk about child safety first everywhere, right? It's a principle, recognized across our society. But what do we see in courts? Maybe money first, because that's what it is after all, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, and I think we see a lot that children are treated as marital property, right? Like the house and the car, and not human beings with inalienable rights to grow up in a safe family or grow up in a home where they're not being harmed. Darrel, can you tell us a little more about what happens at these so-called camps, which I know happen in hotel rooms often and not actual camps? Can you describe how the children are treated and what they do at these camps?
Yeah, so we've had many reports from the children and from the protective parents about what happens, and it's basically a three-part operation. The kids are transported by transport agents. The transport agents start with the threats. They start the threats immediately. In my case, almost every case I know about, the primary threat is that if the kids don't go with the transport agents and go to this camp, the protective parent will go to jail or prison. So it's a fairly diabolical threat, because there's nothing the kids can do about it. The reason is they really want the children to obey. And their primary threat is, if you do not obey, we will send you, the parent is protective, to jail. So that's part one. Part two is they go to a workshop. They're shown some materials which are basically, they're just noise. They're not that important. What the important part of the workshop is, the threats continue. The primary threats are, they refer to the transport agents. They tell the kids if they don't retract or recant abuse, they'll go to wilderness camp, mental institution, or they'll go to a residential treatment facility. And then the most important part is the aftercare. The aftercare is always 90 days. There's a very rare case when it's not. And it's never 90 days. There is no parent that I've been aware of who has ever been able to fulfill the requirement to see their children within 90 days. And the effect on parents is diabolical. As Adrian pointed out, the financial costs are just astronomical.
And we're talking like $40,000 or more for essentially like 4 or 5 days in a hotel.
Yes, that's right. So thank you for bringing that up. It's between $5,000 and $10,000 a day just to get through the workshop, and then the aftercare, and there's just no end to it. So it's just a way to drain the parent financially until there's no way that they can fight back.
Unbelievable. What do you think we can do to stop these harmful camps? Adrian, I know you had your hand up. Did you want to talk about that or something else?
What I wanted to talk is probably more than 100,000. First of all, is not 40,000. I know from my case, because I got the bill and I still have to pay it, despite reversing them. The second thing, which is very interesting, what they did, because you have a time limit when you can appeal. And I appealed. That froze the case. They didn't want to even touch the custody at that point until the appeal was over, which took 3 years. I couldn't see my children. So what do you do now? So that's a very interesting aspect. So I don't know what it can be done, because it's absolutely diabolical. I think that's the word that Darrel used. No matter what you do, you basically lose. It's like a game in which the protective parent loses no matter what. You appeal, you have to wait 3 years for the appeal to go through all the process. You don't see your children, right? Because that 90 days now turns into 3 months, is now 3 years. And I'm sure other people face the same situation. That's about it. That's all I wanted to add.
I think public awareness is such an important step with these camps. And when we first started really looking into these more than 5 years ago, no one knew of them. And I do think that in the last year or so, at least professionals in the field and child abuse and domestic violence are waking up and recognizing that these are pretty barbaric programs that should not be court ordered. Darrel, and you know that there's just not a lot of regulation of these, right? So is that
there's basically no regulation. That's right. So there's no regulation of the camps. There's very little regulation of the participants. You've tried to get some regulation of at least the participants, but the camps themselves, we've not been successful. I will point out that the question you asked is, what can we do about it? The important thing to do is to make sure you ask questions. Are these camps successful in any way? There are children who have been through the camps who have come out in the media and said, not only do the camps not work, but they're destructive. There are more coming. But the important and critical point is to ask questions. Who has been through these before? Can you talk to them? You want to see their records. You want to be able to talk to them to make sure that when they promise that there's a successful resolution, that it actually is a successful resolution in a way you understand. It's just absolutely critical that people ask questions as if they are a regular facility and get the answers they need, because judges otherwise will order them and then be absolutely shocked at what happens. So please ask as many questions as you can before your children get sent or you are ordered in.
Right. Yeah, I think these children who have survived these camps are really going to be the mobilization for change. And we're starting a youth initiative with some survivors of the camps at the Center for Judicial Excellence in the next couple of months, so they can find their voices, speak out about it, and it's firsthand experience for them. This is what they endured. So thank you. I did want to shift to talk about, I wanted to ask you, Priscilla, did you learn anything through this whole journey that you went on with Mia? What protective parents like Mia need in order to get through these grueling court experiences? What do you think friends and family can do to help someone who's fighting to protect their children to get through this years-long slog that many of them are in the courts?
I think friends and family can help in myriad ways. I think they can accompany the person to court. My mother, who is a close friend of Mia's, actually went to court with her, sat with her, took her out to dinner afterwards. I, on the other hand, stayed with the young children when Mia had to go to court and distracted them, diverted them, played with them, nourished them in every way that I could. But I think the most important thing is to listen to the person who's going through the experience, because some people don't want to talk about it when they're not in court. Some people want to shut it out. Some people need to vent and have somebody listen to them and go over it, prepare for it, debrief after it. So I would say that the best advice I would give is just to be tuned in to the individual in your life, ask them what they most need and try to give it to them. And to the friends and family, realize the enormity of the stress this person is going through, and take care of yourself too. Because one thing that Alan v. Farrow made clear to me was that I had gone so passionately into the support role that I didn't take time to heal myself, because friends and family are also harmed and also traumatized by the experience. And take care of yourself and listen to your friend or family member and give them what they specifically require in spades.
That's great. Great advice. Thank you. Kathy, your foundation, Kayden's Korner, is doing such important healing work with mothers who've lost a child to murder by the other parent. Can you tell us where you're calling in from today, and what's the vision of your advocacy work kind of into the future?
Sure. So I started Kayden's Korner obviously right after Kayden was killed. It just kind of happened by default. The vision of that, where we're kind of trying to go, has kind of changed over the years. But I do know that the reason that I do this is because when I went through court, I was alone. I was essentially alone. I didn't want to burden my family and friends. I felt like I just was completely overwhelmed. My anxiety was through the roof. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I had no one really to talk to. Yeah, I could talk to my friends and family, but it's like no one really knew what I was going through. And I look back and I said, had I known, that all these other places existed, like Center for Judicial Excellence and all the other people that I've come across as the years have gone by, would it have been different? Would I have felt so alone? Would my outcome have been the same? And, by sharing my story of Kayden and by sharing with, connecting with all these people across the country, it's actually, helped me heal, so to speak, and given people maybe some hope that there is people that you can reach out to, that there is, someone that can help not guide you, but literally, I knew nothing. I didn't know what narcissist abuse was. I didn't know any of that stuff when I was going through this. And I look back now and think, had I had all this information at my disposal, or these advocates at my right hand, would things have been different? And I think that they probably might have been. And so that's what keeps me going. Eventually, I hope to have a place of our own where we can, have conventions, meetings, a place for safe parents, protected parents, both genders, the kids, and those that have not only just lost children to filicide or murder by the other parent, but those kids that have actually, have aged out, or they've grown up, or those that have survived, so to speak, family court. I'm headed up to New Jersey right now for a retreat for, there's about 10 other mothers flying in from all over the country that have lost children the same way I lost Kayden. And we've never met in person, but we ever connected with them online. And this weekend, Hayden's House of Healing, which is an amazing group that helps people that have lost children, are hosting us. And we are collaborating with them to try to come together and not heal, but just, meet and be with one another, because I've only ever met one other woman that lost a child the same way I did. So this is the first, and we are grateful for Hayden's House, and we are, I'm actually headed there right now. Everyone's flying in kind of from all over the country tomorrow. So we're going to get this weekend going and hopefully bond with people that I've never met, but
Thank you for all that work that you do. It's really sounds like it's going to be a very powerful, meaningful weekend.
Yeah, October 1st is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It starts, obviously, it's a big month at Kayden's Korner, and that's why I kind of chose this weekend. We're going to be dedicating, candlelight things to those that we've lost through domestic violence, those that have survived, all of the above. So looking forward to actually, can't say it's going to be a great weekend because nothing really is, but
Sure.
we'll do our best.
Thanks so much for making time to be with us today. Darrel, you've written about how your separation from your children in the family court system has resulted in a disconnect from their African American and Native American heritage and identities. I just wanted to ask you, do you think that family courts in general are race conscious?
I want to just sort of summarize that by asking people to go to family court and seeing particularly who comes out of jail, and just look for yourself, and you can answer that question yourself, because I've written about this, but I think it's probably more valuable for people to understand who's being put in jail by family court decisions and who's coming out to explain their behavior. And I think you will be able to answer that question a lot clearer if you just see it yourself.
Well, thank you. Adrian, did you have any final words for everybody watching today? You're muted.
The only thing I would probably ask the parents is, let's keep the fight together and let's make sure we collect as much information as we can. And as far as these reunification camps, one thing we have to be very careful is they're going to disguise themselves in different, so they're going to appear as educational camps, they're going to appear as something, when they're actually probably places where children are actually harmed. And I still don't see how these things are still operating in the United States of America.
Right. Thank you for sharing all your perspectives, Adrian. We're about out of time, but Priscilla, I know you're a mom who studied trauma literature at Yale grad school. Before this panel today, I don't think you were aware of just how much worse the family court outcomes have gotten for so many abused children and their parents since the early 90s, when you were witnessing all of this with Mia. Can you share what it's been like for you today to hear these protective parents' heartbreak in the courts? You'll have our final word.
I had never heard about these camps before I was invited to be on this panel. I'm absolutely horrified. I'm motivated. I'm galvanized. I'm going to go and read about them. I'm going to start advocating against them. And, you know, in a way, we were so lucky with Judge Wilk. He was a visionary. He was way ahead of his time. He listened to Dylan. He listened to Mia. We were unbelievably fortunate. I see now, but in a strange way, we won the battle, but we lost the war, because all of the tactics that Woody Allen used, as Kathy was speaking, as Adrian was speaking, as Darrel was speaking, I was hearing those strategies that became mainstream because Woody successfully deployed them in the media. Demonize the other parent. It's the other parent that's insane. It's the other parent that's unstable. And all of those tactics, the parental alienation, became, it's gotten worse, much worse. I am motivated. And as you know, Kathy, I am a mother of 2 special needs children. I wrote my first book as an advocate for my son to help change the discourse around autism. And as I listen to Kathy, Darrel, and Adrian, you all inspire me so much as advocates, not only for your individual children, but for other parents. You're providing a sense of community. You're giving them tactics, strategies, moral support, solidarity. We all need to listen to each other's stories and motivate each other. This is an ongoing crisis. And we all, I am, my heart is full and I am ready to act.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Priscilla. And thank everyone who is watching for joining us tonight for such an important discussion. You can view a recording of tonight's panel, as well as last week's discussion on grooming and child protection, on the Jane Doe Films YouTube and Facebook pages. For more information on our partners and host committees, as well as how you can get involved, we have specific things that you can sign up for to be trained as an advocate, ways that you can get involved in helping better protect children in family courts. Go to allenvfarrowseries.com/take action. Thank you all for joining us and have a great rest of your evening.